Hi, and welcome to Something to Talk About. I'm Linda McNamee, and for the next hour, we're going to be learning all about genealogy. Yes, the title is Finding Your Roots, but we're not talking about gardening. That was the last show. We are talking about genealogy and family history, which is really, really cool. But before I begin, as usual, I would like to invite you to give us a call this evening if you have a question for our guest. You could give us a call at 781 270-9199. I never call, so I don't know the number all the time. Or you can email me at talk@bcattv.org. I love getting email that is not spam. I would like to thank the volunteers for this evening who are helping with the show. We have Colleen Moore, who is Director Extraordinaire. I know she hates that title, but I'm going to call her that anyway. We have Jolie Atwood and Stephanie Floridis, who are volunteers here. And thank you to the three of them for giving up their Wednesday evening to come and help us out at BCAT. And we also have Sir Chris Flaherty, also fondly known as Christoph, who is a staff member here, and he makes sure that everything goes off smoothly and the volunteers know what they're doing. So thank you, everyone. And last but definitely not least, I want to thank my husband, Paul, for staying home for Daddy Date Night. Hopefully, dance class went well with our little one, and hopefully everybody's in bed right now. Okay, logistics aside, we are ready to go. I would like to introduce my wonderful guest, Francine Crowley, who actually, through genealogy and the wonders of the internet, we found out we were related.
We absolutely did. Thank you for having me.
So, genealogy is one of those subjects that, like, everybody wants to know about and nobody really knows how to start doing. And some people just kind of dabble in it, and some people are like, well, I don't know. But you are, like, really getting involved.
I am very involved. I've done a lot of courses. Okay. And I've taken a hobby that started when I was about 8 years old.
Wow.
Yes. And I've taken it now through courses. So
you're like a lifer with this.
I am.
Cool. Okay, let's back up a little bit. We already started about 8 years old. So can you, with every show, I'd like my guest to kind of fill us in on who they are and build some credibility. And can you tell us where you grew up, how you came to the Boston area, and again, then we can go back into how you got interested in genealogy.
Of course.
It's hard to say.
It is. So, born and raised in Massachusetts, grew up in Westford, Massachusetts, and have pretty much stayed in that local area my whole life.
Wow.
Yes.
I made the mistake of moving to Florida for a couple of years and couldn't wait to get back.
I understand that. So. I lived in Martha's Vineyard for a short time, loved the island, but there were some logistical challenges of getting on and off.
Understood. So let's continue. How did you, when you were 8 years old, did you see something on TV? Did you have family that was interested in genealogy? Or are you just like, super sleuth problem solver? And how'd you get interested?
Sure. So it was about the time that Roots was prevalent on television. Mm-hmm. We were given a school project, about second grade, I believe.
Okay.
Please go back, get your grandparents, your great-grandparents, and come back and share it with the group.
Wow.
So I have French-Canadian roots, and I have Irish roots. And I called my grandmother, who was here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Okay. She was one of 17.
Whoa.
Yes, big Irish family.
Feel sorry for your great-grandmother.
Indeed. And I asked her to help me out with her siblings and her parents' names, and she quickly dismissed me. She told me that she did not know her siblings' names and that she was sorry she couldn't help me, and I thought it was curious, but as a young child...
You're 8,
right? Wow. So I was rather upset, thinking I was going to go in and fail my assignment.
Oh, no.
So my mom said, please call my mother in New York, which I did, and she gave me 8 generations back.
8?
8.
Wow.
Yes. So I was...
Yeah, we're going to put her on speed dial.
Absolutely. So I was...
Thank you, I didn't fail second grade.
So I was very intrigued with how she knew so much, and my paternal grandmother knew so little and was not willing to share. So my whole...
Now, the one where you did trace back 8 generations, was it just like one stream, or did she know your grandfather, and was it complete?
So her line back into Ireland she actually did get me back into Ireland, and through the years, the folklore that you learn about your family either proves to be true or not. We all have these famous stories that we have Indian princesses or whatnot. But
You're related to Abraham Lincoln.
That is right.
Everybody's related, or Thomas Jefferson, or whoever.
Yeah. So what she gave me was actually accurate, and it was a lot of fun to prove it out on paper.
Okay. Now, when did you decide to prove it out? Like in second grade, or
of course
did you just hold on to this? And
I held on to it for a long time, and sort of in the back of my mind was curious, very interested in history, so tried to connect the pieces with French Canadian and Ireland and the stories. About the time, right after high school, I believe, I started going to the NARA, which is the National Records Archive. There's one here in Waltham.
Yeah, I drove by it the other day and I went, who knew?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So what kind of, let's take tangent number one. What is at the National Archives there?
Every location is different. So you will find in some locations they'll have World War I, World War II military records.
Okay.
Other places you'll find different record sets.
Okay.
So everyone is different, located across the United States.
Okay.
So my dad and I would go, and we would sit in front of the microfiche and crank for hours. And at the time, we didn't have the internet available to us.
Right. So as soon as you said microfiche, I'm like, okay, obviously not, the internet. You probably didn't hop onto an iMac or
no, definitely not. And then there was a system very much like the card catalog that you would see in the library.
Okay.
That kids nowadays may not be familiar with. But there was a Soundex, and you would take, for example, my last name, Crowley, and you would sort of chop it up that it began with a C and then there were some numbers after it. Okay. And that would be how you would search, and it would give you a broad search so that you could catch all the variants of that name.
Okay.
So that was
would
highly
you also
unsuccessful.
Have to, redo it with a K as well?
Oftentimes, yes.
Okay. Because my dad, I think after he met you, he decided to go on the genealogy bug, and he started researching and everything. And I'm sure I'll bring him up a lot during the show, but he was saying that he went back and siblings, like same household, there'd be like 12 siblings, and there'd be 8 different spellings of his last name.
Right. And that will happen frequently depending on who is the record taker. Okay. For example, a census enumerator may or may not know how to spell that last name, and maybe the person giving the information, the informant, may not know how to read or write.
Okay, especially if you go back a few generations.
Certainly. So
and then also it used to be handwritten, and he said, sometimes the fancy L looked like an S, and
correct. And then when you go back even further, an F would serve as a double S. So 2 S's actually look like an F.
Wow.
Yes. So
like on all the historical documents, the F with a big. Wow. So how do you overcome stuff like the F being the double S and different last names, and
you have to
trial and error?
So there's a lot of research and understanding, education, extensive studying on how to understand what colonial writing was versus a different period in time. Regionalization certainly is something that you want to study.
Wow.
So, yes.
So have you studied some of this stuff? Like you had mentioned the certification program that you recently participated in.
So over the past 5 years, I've really gotten serious about genealogy. So researching my whole life, really, but very serious about it. I completed the Boston University Research Certificate Program. Okay. I have gone to universities all across the country.
Cool.
I've taken a university course out of Scotland, Glasgow.
Did you get to go to Scotland?
Unfortunately, not yet.
Yet. Okay, I like that. Yet. Well, it's close to Ireland. You have family over in Ireland.
I do, but I can't jump across the pond, unfortunately, until I complete my Irish research.
Oh, okay. Wait, complete. Will it ever be complete?
Never. In my opinion, never.
Well, you might have to go to Ireland a little sooner than it's complete.
Correct. So what happens specifically with Irish research is they will give a departure city where they got on the boat, but that may not be where they actually lived. So to get back to the homeland and walk on that old sod, unfortunately, I know where they departed, but I don't know yet.
Oh, okay. Are there ways of finding that out?
There are. Irish research is challenging, however, because a lot of the records were destroyed and burned in the courthouses, and we've lost a lot of records, even here in the U.S., from fires.
Okay. Because when you said burned, I'm like, is this deliberate or is it accidental or both?
Both. So there was civil unrest in Ireland.
Okay.
And one of the courthouses did indeed burn. Wow. Yes. So we've lost a lot of records, even here in St. Louis and Mississippi, Missouri, a lot of World War II records.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And there's no way of recovering those, probably. Like government backups, if it's like military or
some are pieced together in different ways. Unfortunately, some of them have been lost forever. There are preservation acts going now where they are piecing ashes together to try to recreate.
You're kidding.
No.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's extensive work they've taken on.
It's like a whole new branch of forensics.
It is.
Wow.
In genealogy, what I was unaware when I took the Boston University course, it does indeed go into forensics. Cold cases, bringing back the soldiers and identifying via DNA. Oh, wow. Mineral, oil, and gas rights. So genealogy is more than just perhaps a shaky leaf that some of us may know.
Yeah. So more about this like certification program. Is it like a licensing, or is it just like the equivalent of a degree, like graduate work?
So unfortunately, there is not currently a degree program for genealogy. Okay. When you tell people that you do genealogy, they think you're a hobbyist, but when you do explain to them that you are a professional genealogist, what that entails is there is a certifying body that you put together a portfolio, and that portfolio goes in front of several judges, and they judge your work.
No intimidating there.
It can take people probably 3 or 4 years, 2, 3, 4 years to complete it. It's very much like a dissertation.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So I'm in the process of completing that now.
Okay. So it's not like a licensing where you have to go back and prove yourself worthy every 2 or 5 years.
You recertify.
Oh, you do need to recertify.
You do.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So every couple of years you do recertify. You provide additional work projects.
Okay. But so you just kind of like extend the...
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And
so,
sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I believe that the numbers are about 30% that submit actually pass and become certified. It's rigorous.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they just kind of make sure that your research is correct?
They are the top genealogists, researchers, lawyers, because the field is full of academia. And they will review your work. They're all anonymous, so we don't know who the judges are.
That's probably a good thing.
Right.
For them.
Indeed, indeed.
Now, when you research, you talked about going to National Archives and going through the microfiche. What are some of the other methods that you could use?
A lot of records, fortunately for us today, are online.
Okay.
The family
Are there
history.
Like websites to avoid?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that you would start with a specific question.
Okay.
And from there, you would go ahead and broadly research. You want your narrowed question on what you're looking for, but you broadly research what you're trying to accomplish. And you can look anywhere. Google Books is a great resource that I have used in the past. Ancestry.com, things that people are familiar with.
Now let's pause for a second because
Sure.
I do believe we have a phone call. Do we? Can we hear? Hello?
Hello, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Hi, Linda. Hi, Francis.
Hi.
I want to ask your guest about East Eastern Europeans in their genealogy, because that's where my people come from, both from Czechoslovakia on the maternal side of the family and from the Ukraine.
Okay. All right. So, can we turn that down a little bit? I'm getting some feedback. So, are there methods that are different, like from the United States versus, like you mentioned, going over to Ireland? Have you had any experience in, like Greg asked, Eastern European?
So the research that I have dealt with in Europe right
Okay.
now has been specifically France and Portugal.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I have not done any of the Ukraine records.
Okay.
But I believe that Family Search does have some of those records available online. They may not be indexed yet, but they are
Okay.
available.
So, what's Family Search? Is that like a website?
It is a website, familysearch.org.
Okay.
And that is the Mormon Church in Salt Lake City, and they preserve the records. They send people out and image them all over the world.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so that might be a good place for you to start, Greg.
Okay.
So,
We also wanted to add is when families came over, now they got a different agent at customs. A lot of times they had different spelling of their last name, or maybe even their first name as well. Because what they did was they tried to spell the name phonetically speaking the way it sounded. And it was always, it was a kind of a gray area. It was always subject to some interpretation.
right, yeah, we're going to be talking about that a little. We touched upon it briefly, locally, like within the United States, but, we will be continuing and talking about how to overcome some of those obstacles.
Absolutely.
Specifically.
And I got one other question. It might be a little bit off the subject, but I'll certainly approach it. I was thinking of possibly changing my last name back to the original paternal name, which was Schmoot, and which is, I understand from one of my cousins who did a research of that name, it's very Ukrainian.
Okay.
I know that he did a research on the paternal side of the family, and then another relative on the maternal side of the family did a research.
Yep, so we'll talk about, name changes and some of the legality and some of the obstacles that you need to overcome. But we're getting some nasty feedback in here, so Greg. So just stay tuned and we will get to those questions, okay?
Okay.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for calling. Great ideas. Okay, so where do you start your research? Do you go to like the town hall, or do you start with like family?
Family lore. So your best resource is what you know,
Okay.
what your elders in your family, your aunts, your uncles, your parents, your grandparents, if you still have that
Okay.
luxury, great-grandparents. Gather as much information that you possibly can from them.
Okay.
And then from
Write
there,
it down.
absolutely, it's so important because unfortunately, once they're gone,
Yeah.
you don't have that opportunity
Well,
again.
Another tangent, you're talking about, asking family. I think after my grandfather had passed, my father and his sister went to my grandmother and said, here's a whole box of photos. Write down their names
That's right.
so we can know. Well, this is George, and this is Annabelle, and this is Fred. And we're like,
Fred who?
Fred who? Exactly. And it's
Yeah.
like, are they friends? Are they family? Last names would have helped.
Sure.
Dates, or even, ballpark dates like, mid 60s or. Okay, so anyway, start with family.
Definitely start with family. And what's funny, you had mentioned your dad prior, and I'm sure we'll get into how I connected with your dad, but
Oh, we could do that now.
sure. So
This is my cheat sheet, so we don't have to go in order.
I found your dad on a website, findagrave.com.
Yeah, it was like gravestones and cemetery markers.
It is. So it's a crowdsourcing volunteer site where people can go ahead and put information on their loved ones, or they can, catalog a cemetery, for example, volunteer to take photos in their local area. And I had been researching my great-grandmother on my father's side, back to
Okay.
that 17 children that has bothered me my whole life.
Didn't really exist. I don't know who my siblings were. We didn't talk,
That. So I was researching her extensively, and I found your dad had put information on my great-grandmother's sister, who is your great-grandmother.
Okay. So on this website, you need to know the location of the grave. So is there also location where that individual lived? Because sometimes it's not the same city.
Depending on the person putting that information in there, they may or may not know, and they may upload that. And your dad was a treasure putting the information on the site.
Yeah, he's a little no. I love him dearly, but yeah, sometimes he's a little too detail oriented.
I wasn't sure at that time if I had the right family, but because he had so much information on there, I knew.
Wow. And those sisters grew up in Watertown, didn't they?
They did.
Okay.
Yeah, so they left Ireland, Glenville, but I believe that was the departure city.
Okay.
Called Famine Road.
Okay.
And then they came to the U.S., and there were 5 sisters that came. Several brothers and a sister stayed behind in Ireland, and they were in Watertown and Newton, so all local.
Okay.
But back to where I was going with it, my aunt, my father's sister, remembered seeing your dad and your aunt up at York Beach, Maine, but no one ever talked about it. As a genealogist, please tell me what you know, but they don't think of those little details.
Yeah.
Right? So they knew when I said to my aunt, guess who I met? Another relative. And they said, oh yeah, we know about them.
And you were withholding this from me. Why?
Right. So a great place to start, again, family, but then you would probably, depending on what you're trying to know, Ancestry, look at census records, look at birth, marriage, death records.
Okay.
Probably a very good place to start. Military.
Greg had mentioned, different spellings, and, we were mentioning that, depends on who gives the information, who takes the information, handwriting. I think my dad was telling me that some of the census takers back in the turn of the last century were like soldiers returning from war, and they were veterans, and here's a clipboard, go walk around the neighborhood, and some of them didn't have perfect handwriting, and people who recorded it, so there was literally stuff lost in translation.
Absolutely, and I have found that in my French records as well. Portuguese, the enumerator may not have had any idea how to even pretend to spell what they were hearing, and the people giving the information, the informant, may not have known how to read or write.
Okay. And like the 17 brothers and sisters, there's bound to forget one or two.
Of course.
Oh, yeah. And Greg also mentioned name changes. I know this is like huge, but between marriages and remarriages and divorces and people just trying to get back to their ancestral roots, and again, like I was mentioning, I don't know if it was before the show or when we started, my dad looked up some ancestors, and there were 8 people in the same household with 6 different last names or something like that, because it's all in, who happens to answer the door and who happens to write down the information. So how do you go about problem solving that? Because then your family tree goes in like a bazillion branches.
It does. And back to our great-grandparents, my dad and I would have discussions about how you spelled their last name, because it was a certain way on one record and a different way on another. So you have to have an open mind about what you're reading on the actual document, and understand why the record was created, who was filling out the information, who was the informant, and understand also that people changed their names. We've all heard about the Ellis Island changed their names, and it's a fallacy.
Oh, really? Okay.
It is.
It's one of those urban legends.
So the documentation on the manifests were filled out from the point of departure.
Okay.
So when people were coming into Ellis Island, there wasn't that paperwork that people were changing people's names. However, sometimes people that came to the U.S. wanted to assimilate, and they're French, and they're living in an Irish community.
Oh.
So they would change their name to fit in, or Irish need not apply. We've all heard about that. So perhaps they've tweaked their name a little bit.
And sometimes I've heard like
assimilate.
stories recently of people doing that now.
Right.
Because they want to sound less ethnic, whatever that ethnicity happens to be.
And I believe that's exactly what happened back then.
Oh, okay. So in your research, if you're doing this and you find like someone with multiple last names, do you record all of those, or do you pick the one that shows up most often? And then what happens when you try to go back the next generation, because you have all these different options?
So I definitely do record all the variants that I find.
Okay.
Again, keeping an open mind, and then trying to get as far back to the root, the birth.
Oh, okay.
Or the parents' birth, and what was the regionalization, the history where they were located,
okay.
and what was that name. So for my name, Crowley, may have been O'Crowley back in Ireland.
Okay.
So trying to understand, Crowley isn't a Crowly, it could be an Ley.
Uh-huh.
So looking at all of the variants available to you.
Okay. Well. Okay, something that just totally popped in my mind that is totally random. What do you do with all this information? Why do you do genealogy? Is it just out of curiosity? Are you hoping to uncover some, answer to the life, universe, and everything? Or why do you do this?
I started doing it as curiosity. Now I think it helps me understand who I am and where I've come from.
Okay.
I found a lot of similarities. I can look at a photo of my eldest daughter, and if I make it black and white, it is the same photo as my great-grandmother.
Wow. So in addition to doing names, you also try to get photos?
I have photos of every great-grandparent.
Wow.
And thanks to your dad, one great-great-grandmother.
Wow.
Back in the early 1800s in Ireland.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
It is.
Because photos are hard to get to, because like we were saying, my grandmother just put, first names, Fred, Sally, Joyce, and, they don't last.
They don't. And preservation is really important in genealogy. Scanning, but scanning in the proper way to preserve it. If you scanned it as a PDF, you open it X number of times, the resolution isn't the same. So
I didn't know that.
No. So understanding how to preserve records and documents
Okay.
for future generations.
And even before the age of electronic preservation, I remember a long time ago, like in my parents' house, they have their wedding picture and their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents. So that's probably where my dad got the great for us.
Yes.
Okay, so I have to visualize it on the wall. But, okay, they were doing this in the 1970s, I think. And they were finding tintypes, and they would find, this person in a crowd, and then this person over here, and the person would preserve them and also I don't even know if they digitized back then, but morphed them into one picture so it looked like the couple.
Yeah. And that happened fairly frequently. There's actually a famous photo, you mentioned Lincoln earlier, of the president as a ghost after he was assassinated, standing behind Mary Todd.
Really?
There is. So
Cool.
they've been doing this for a long time.
Wow. So where do you find the photos? Because they're not always with, the records at town hall, or definitely not in cemeteries.
Families,
Okay.
cousins, lineage societies, historic societies. Photo identification is a big part of genealogy
Okay.
today. In the Boston University research course that I took, we were given a photo, not told where it was. It was about that big, and there were probably 150 people in it.
Wow.
And we were to identify where it came from, what period of time, and who was in the picture. And I identified 50 people.
Wow.
There was a flag in the backdrop, so understanding how many stars were on the flag. So being able to understand not only the dress that they were wearing, the outfits, but understanding what types of trees are in the background and identifying people that way. often in
Wow.
societies, is a professional genealogist's job as well.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's a lot of fun.
I can imagine. It's like, a history detective.
It is.
So cool. So let's talk about some of the other resources. So I don't know if we've exhausted it. Can you exhaust it?
I don't think so. There are records coming online every day.
Okay.
Cemeteries, you'll find a headstone where you can extract information from
Okay.
there. And then that would also lead you to the burial records that are at the
Okay.
cemetery, burial records and medical records that are involved in that person's death.
Okay. And these are slowly becoming available online as well?
More and more.
Or do you still have to
every
do a lot of
day.
footwork where you show up at, Johnston, Vermont and
I don't think everything will ever be all online.
okay.
There's a lot of on-site research that one needs to do for exhaustive research to understand a full picture and know you have the right person, the right place, the right time, and you have them in context of
Okay.
their history, their time in history, their socioeconomic background, their
Okay.
religious background.
Hmm.
So there's many different record groups
Okay.
that are available, and a lot of them again are more readily online as they are
Okay.
20 years ago. But
Now, we met, since we're talking about online, Ancestry.com, I've heard good things and I've heard bad things about them. And, they also require a subscription service.
they do.
Are there other websites that don't require you to pay some fee?
FamilySearch.org,
Okay.
the one that I mentioned earlier, that is the Mormon Church out of Salt Lake City.
Okay.
A lot of the records you can find there. There's a great website, Cindy's List, CYNDI.
Okay.
She has a lot of resources to free websites, and she has a great repository where she'll tell you all the records in U.S. and then break it down by
Okay.
state, and then break it down by ethnicity, and break it down by
Wow.
churches and military. So she's a great
Wow.
resource as well that is free.
Okay. Now, also, back to Ancestry, there's like a free service and a paid service. So the free service is kind of like you can work in your own little bubble, and the paid service, I guess, is you share information into like a common database, and then others can access that database, and you can access other databases. Is that how?
You will
It
have
works.
access to certain record groups on a
Okay.
paid subscription.
Okay.
You can have just a US or just Canadian or just the
Okay.
UK, or you can have a world access records, so you
Okay.
get everything. The challenge with Ancestry, and I would caution viewers,
Okay.
is you may find information that you think the shaky leaf will lead you there, and you asked about how do I determine what a good variant name spelling and how do I
Okay.
research that.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, if you follow that shaky leaf without doing the appropriate analysis of what they're telling you,
Okay.
you can end up with the wrong tree back to the wrong people, and you may be related to Lincoln when you are really related to Jefferson.
Okay.
So caution when you're looking at other people's family trees or record groups.
Okay,
to
because
do
it's
the
what they
analysis.
find, and they might not have gone through the training that you have or any training, and it's just like what Uncle Bob remembered from 20 years ago or 50 years ago or whatever, so it might not necessarily be accurate.
Right, and they may have just accepted a hint, for example, without really
Okay.
analyzing the record.
Oh, okay. Wow. All right, I gotta. So what we talked a little bit about, name changes and spellings. Are there other really weird obstacles, or have you ever like really hit a dead end or a brick wall in any of your studies?
Brick walls are common
Okay.
in genealogy. Oftentimes, the answer is one record will not tell you the answer of what you need to know, and you need to make inferences
Okay.
to understand the indirect information that the records may not give you, to put together pieces like a puzzle.
Okay.
So those things can create challenges for people that don't have the experience, or that are
Okay.
new, or perhaps hobbyists that
Okay.
that haven't experienced that kind of research in the
Ooh.
past. So I have had several. I've
Okay.
broken through several. I still have some. I mean, my genealogy, as far as I'm concerned, will never
Okay.
be done. What is also very nice about Ancestry, to go
Okay.
back to Ancestry.
I don't want to
is,
sound like a commercial for Ancestry because I've never been on the site, so.
You can do your DNA.
Really?
Yes. So you
How do
can.
you do that?
Different companies offer it.
Like, you don't like spit on the screens.
So you are given a tube.
Okay.
You can do what is called autosomal DNA. So you will spit in a little tube. You'll send it off to the diagnostic company that does the testing for
Okay.
you. And you'll see some of these things on TV, maybe floating around Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
where they'll say your ethnicity is X percent in
Yeah, I've
the
seen
British
people,
Isles,
yeah.
right? So what's nice about that, if you did have your tree online
Mm-hmm.
through Ancestry, and there are other places you can put that information, you can take your DNA and you can connect with other people that are also related that have also done their DNA.
Wow.
So you can find cousins or
Okay.
closer or farther away that have the same people shared, and you can see how their tree is and take their information that
Wow.
perhaps they have.
Now, do you think this whole DNA option is going to take off and become more popular?
It is definitely more popular today than when it first started.
Okay.
It's helping a lot of adoptees understand
Oh.
their
Yeah.
roots,
Okay.
and it certainly is connecting a lot more people. There are things called a non-paternal event, an NPE,
Okay.
where your paper may match up, but perhaps my great-great-grandfather passed away and a kind gentleman stepped in with the 17 children and married my great-great-grandmother, and they knew him as their father, but he may not have
Okay.
been.
So like a stepdad type situation.
Sure, and that may not be on paper in the 1800s, 1700s.
Okay. Because I was also, as you started talking about, you mentioned adoption. Now, how would that look on a family tree? Because, depending on the family, they would see that adopted child as their child. But would you want an option to have like a branch going off to the birth parents? Or,
And I have a friend who did the BU course with me,
okay.
and she is also a professional genealogist out of Ohio, and she is adopted. And she found her birth parents
Okay.
through DNA analysis, and she does list both. So she has 4 parents.
Double trunk.
Yes, 4 parents on her tree. They have made available the opportunity for that adoption
Okay.
situation, so you can list that on your tree.
Now, do you need I'm just thinking, Excel spreadsheets would not be a good option.
No. So a lot of people do use them for compare and contrast data,
Okay.
but there are specific software companies out there,
Okay.
Roots Magic, Family Tree Maker, that will
Okay.
sync to, an Ancestry.com or a FamilySearch.org,
okay.
where you can move your data and sync it back and forth seamlessly. But you can take your information offline as well.
Okay.
So if you weren't willing to share your information with others, perhaps I didn't feel confident about what I have, and I didn't want to put it online and have other people copy incorrect data,
Okay.
and then it explode, the old commercial, they told 2 friends, told 2 friends.
Yeah. And so on and so.
Right. So there are software providers that do offer
Okay.
that service.
Okay. Now, speaking of, sharing information, there are a lot of good, honest people around that will only put the truth, and they want to do this for curiosity, for education, for posterity. Have you ever found evidence where people try getting in for like identity theft, or, your rich uncle, left, was in the French Foreign Legion and just send me your bank number, and, have you found evidence of this?
I have never had that experience myself. However, forensics genealogists that I am friendly with will often get some of those cases where people are trying to connect land rights that they have no right to. There are some records that the government provides that, in today's society, we may not want those records visible and out there, but there are some controls as well. So after someone dies, a record in a certain state may not be available to the public after 50 years, 75 years, 100 years.
Okay.
So some of those records are not available. I've never come across it. I adhere to the Association of Professional Genealogists Ethics and Standards,
Okay.
as well as the BCG standards, and they are rigorous.
Okay.
But fortunately,
not
I
everybody,
have never
not
come
everybody
across
is
that.
so honest.
Right.
Okay. I'm just staring at my questions going, yeah, I don't think we talked about this one yet. In your personal research, how much have you been able to do online? Is it like a 90, and how much have you had to do like in libraries and on the microfiche and visiting cemeteries? Is it like a 90-10 split, or is it 50-50, or?
I can find a lot online, certainly.
Okay.
But because I'm a geeky genealogist, I want to get all the nitty gritty, everything I can. I want to know the house history of where my great-grandparents
So you want like
lived.
the complete picture.
I do. I want the health history to understand that there were heart issues for 5 generations. So I have gathered information, probably 50-50, on site, on the websites, and sitting and grinding through libraries and flipping old newspaper articles.
Sometimes you need that paper and
Absolutely.
you
There
know.
is nothing like sitting in front of a document, a book, in the courthouse basement that is musty and moldy. And I know it doesn't sound attractive at all, but you know no human hands or have touched this and no eyes have seen this.
Do you have to wear white
In
gloves?
100+ years, sometimes that has happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
so,
like cool.
I have handled some deeds from the 1600s. I have a personal collection of deeds and whatnot in my home. So, yeah, you know, you do want to be careful with the oils on your hands and continue to preserve those.
Yeah. Because I'm, you know, just thinking, you know, you mentioned deeds and, you know, official documentation. And in my in-laws' house, they have the certificates from their parents, I think all four of them, getting off from Ireland to Ellis Island, saying that, you know, they're here.
That's
and they framed them.
fantastic.
Although they just recently sold the house. I'm not sure where those documents are.
Make sure they're preserved digitally.
So, yeah, I don't know if they are, but I'll get on my husband's case about that. He's pretty good. So, we talked about identity. You know, are there other cautionary practices that you choose or that you suggest to avoid, like the identity theft? Because I remember not too long ago. Well, again, I'm in a time warp. It could be, you know, 40 years ago, and I think it's 5 years ago. But, you know, you're in Massachusetts, your license ID was your social security number, and you needed your social security number for everything, and it was plastered everywhere. And now people are like stealing it.
So well, fortunately or unfortunately, there are people out there that will use information in the wrong manner. Social Security Death Index does often have someone's name and their social security number, where they filed. You can write for information about what's in that file, when was the last claim and benefit. You know, there are some controls there, but they are available if you know where to look for them.
Let's not mention any of those places.
No. But, you know, again, as a responsible person doing research, I would never suggest putting that out there in the public on any reports, on anyone's tree that could be copied, because unfortunately we do live in a day and age where anyone can get their hands on it and not do good things with it.
Okay. Now, I think we talked about this, but, you know, before, when we were in the other room, before we started recording, I mentioned that I joke around with my husband that he married he has 3 wives. And I'm also thinking, well, on the flip side, technically the mailman thinks I have 2 husbands. So, for example, my husband's 3 wives. He bought a house with Linda L. Then, when we first got married, the church had my middle name as Anne. My middle name is not Anne. And they're like, well, yeah, it is. You told us. No, I think I know what my name is. So they redid it. So now, we joke around. There's Linda L, Linda A, and Linda R. Only one's true. So if you found, if I gave you this information and then you started researching on your own and you found a Linda Ann, and it's the same date of birth, same birthplace, and you knew it was false, would you totally discredit it? Ignore it? I don't want to say discredit, but
I personally would notate it, depending on whether I was doing client work or my own research.
Okay.
I would notate that it's an alternative.
Okay.
Understanding
hopefully
that
it's only in that one place.
You never know, but hopefully it is. And I would make sure that the main principal person's information was accurate. There are times that I have not determined that yet in my own research, or even for a client. It's a possibility, and future research would suggest narrowing it down if possible, but perhaps you can't.
Okay. And with my two husbands, one of the nonprofits must have sold a list or made up a list, I don't know, but we get address labels for Linda and John. My husband's name is Paul. They're not even close, other than they were both Beatles, but it's obviously wrong.
Right.
Well, I hope it's obviously wrong.
So I have a case that I'm working now that happens to be my boyfriend's family.
Okay.
But the research is for a gentleman named Samuel.
Okay.
He is in New York. He was a Revolutionary War patriot.
Okay.
There is another gentleman who was born in New York, same year, same name. He was a loyalist. How often do you mix up same name people, same time frame, it happens often. So trying to separate those identities is also a big challenge.
And again, we talked about, different street, different addresses. And I think in my dad's research, he actually found two people with the same last name, maybe even first and last name on the same street.
Sure.
But one was like 83 and one was 126 or something. So
it happened frequently, especially with the naming conventions where you would name after a parent or whatnot. It happened more often than not.
Okay, have you, I'm looking at my last question here. What's the most exciting discovery that you've come across in your family history?
In my family history. I don't like to tell a lot of people about this because it sounds,
somebody else's family history.
It sounds like I'm trying to put a tiara on my head. My French-Canadian line.
Okay.
Which, by the way...
You're royalty?
Yes.
Oh, but I'm related to you
I'm
through
not.
Ireland.
I'm not. But, so we connect through our Irish line on your dad's side.
Yep.
Your dad's maternal line.
Yes.
Were you aware we also connect on your dad's matrilineal line?
What's a matrilineal line?
So your mother and your father's line.
Okay.
So we connect on both. So we're third cousins on your dad's mom's line.
Okay.
We're fifth cousins on your dad's father's line, paternal line. In that line, you may or may not know that goes back deep into French-Canadian history. There are monuments of our ancestors in Montreal.
I gotta go check this out.
And I've traced it back into France. And there's what's called a gateway ancestor.
Okay.
That takes us back to several royal lines and eventually back to Charlemagne.
Wow. Yeah, but eventually everybody gets related back to Charlemagne.
Of course.
But hey, I'm related to Charlemagne.
Right? But it's a lot of fun being in New England and being able to go up to
that is pretty cool.
Montreal and look at those records and look at how those first settlers settled Montreal with Indians and skirmishes and understanding how they came across in canoes. Right?
Yeah.
So that's probably the most exciting thing in our history.
Ooh. So now, I know that, wait, I was going to go in a different tangent, but we'll stick with this one. now you actually do this privately. So somebody can say, hey, trace my ancestry. They actually have like a PBS show on that, don't they?
They do. There are actually several. So you may have heard of, the New Roots program that they just did, I believe on the History Channel. Who Do You Think You Are? There's Finding Your Roots. There's lots of them now. It's become very popular.
So the trend continues.
Absolutely. So I do professionally take it on. I'm working on eventually making this my full-time career.
Cool.
It's so much fun. I work on the Historic Commission as a volunteer position in my town.
Okay.
And I've given...
and what do they do?
So we are doing, right now I'm working on a Massachusetts preservation site. It was a dam.
Okay.
And working with the fishery and game conservation to get it on the National Historical Register.
Oh, cool.
So that is an exciting project that I've taken on.
Yeah.
I'm cataloging a cemetery where there are a lot of Rev War patriots that fought in Bunker Hill.
Now, in your town?
In my town.
Oh, okay.
And getting them recognition on the SAR, DAR, Daughters of the Revolution, database. So I'm working on that as well.
Cool.
Yeah. I have some great projects that I've worked on. There was a gentleman in the Civil War, and he ended up being the president of the Boston Fruit Exchange. So I'm working on that for a client.
Cool.
Yeah.
Now, just another thing kind of popped in my head. We still have a little bit of time left, but you were when you were talking about how for your family history you want to know more than just names. And I'm thinking that my mom, her grandfather, I think, her grandfather or anyway, one of her relatives was actually participating in the California Gold Rush.
Oh, how cool.
And he lived, I think, in the Quebec area of Canada, and he went to California by way of Panama.
Interesting.
So he didn't have any money, so he kind of worked his way across the country, taking the scenic route. And wherever somebody managed to, hey, give him a ride or find a boat or, because back in the California Gold Rush, there weren't airplanes.
Right.
And he kept a diary, and it was in French, and she took the time to translate it to figure out, okay, he's talking about wild pigs or something in one thing, and he's talking about saving lives or almost dying, and it's like, this is like amazing.
Yeah. And when you think about it, back then there weren't defined roads. As the push in the expansion moved west, there weren't roads like we think of today.
Just show up,
Yeah,
go
you went with the
how.
clothes on your back sometimes, and
So
you made do with very little. That's awesome.
Something else. Ah, my brain's going to explode. Oh, another tangent. Have you ever Googled yourself?
Oh, yes. I have.
Okay.
I've seen a lot of information, certainly on my posts on Ancestry or Facebook.
Because I'm just wondering if that would be like, if I personally wanted to start, yes, I would talk to my family, but would I Google myself and see, is any of that useful? Or is that just more like noise?
That can be very useful for air searches. So forensics genealogy, if there was someone in your history that owned property and you didn't know about it, and they were looking through a court case on who this amount of money was supposed to go to, a forensics genealogist would go ahead and do the research and find you. And you might get that phone call that, we all hope that someday we might get, that, your great aunt Clara left you 10 grand or whatever.
Cool.
But there is a lot of information, certainly, and you talked about privacy and identity theft. It is a way that a lot of genealogists that are doing present day air searches can find you. Probably not very helpful for finding your history going back in time. However, I would say about 1940, 1950, finding some of that information on our parents and backwards, Googling them, you might find World War II, I records, right? City directories, and a lot of, tax assessment records. So, recreating a neighborhood or a town or a house history, a lot of that information you will find, and it is very helpful. Google Books, like I said in the beginning, I've gotten so...
Google's just taking over the world.
They are fantastic in providing a lot of resources that are available, and most of them are OCR searchable so that you can put in a keyword and pull it up.
Oh, okay, cool.
There are laws that were created, so there are some legal websites for research that are very helpful as well. National Archives has some websites, have some photos. You can look at maps and look at topographical maps, and when you're talking about that expansion westward, see what it looked like in 1920, 1880. 1850, looking at some of those maps and seeing what that looked like.
Yeah, well, Boston itself is a landfill.
That's right.
So, looking back a couple hundred years, like,
it wasn't there.
Boston wasn't there.
Right.
Now, another question, total tangent, but, you had mentioned that DNA tracing is becoming more popular. Do you suspect that in some point moving forward that information would be shared with other databases, and like unsolved crimes could, with DNA evidence, if it's all online? Do you ever see that happening?
It's happening today.
It is!
It is happening today. So not very CSI-like.
Okay. Oh, darn.
But we actually worked on a cold case at BU. And it was a cold case from the 1970s. And they recreated the skeletal remains to make a model. And they've taken DNA from this woman who unfortunately was murdered, taken DNA from her skeletal remains, and they are identifying who they believed and who is in jail today.
Oh, wow.
But they are connecting cold cases
missing
and solving
persons.
absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's happening today.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and again, bringing home those soldiers, repatriation. That's happening often today with DNA, and remains that were overseas, and being able to connect them to the family and get them buried in the appropriate place.
Wow. Well, I'm glad we ended on a happy note because we are just about out of time.
Well, fantastic.
So I'm so glad that you came.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming. And this is like really, psyching me up. So thank you very much. And I also want to thank everyone at home this evening for tuning in. Hope you found our conversation as enlightening and inspirational as I did. Hope you have a great week, and I will see you around town. Good night.